So today we're going to talk about costume drama. You'll be doing your costume dramas this week. Yeah, well, I know it gets confusing, but go back and look at it. So anyway, I want to talk about a little bit today. So what makes a costume drama a costume drama? That says Costume Drama Thursday. This is Tuesday. I couldn't find one that said that. I didn't make that. I just stole it from the internet. But I think somebody must have a feature where they show a costume drama every Thursday or something. Because there are a lot of costume dramas. Can you guys name a costume drama movie? That should be easy, because there's like hundreds of them. Anything British. Well, a lot of costume dramas are British. Or, what's that? Game of Thrones. Yeah. Yeah, I guess that would count. Yeah.
What about Alexander?
Alexander, the movie Alexander, about Alexander the Great? Is that what you mean?
The play. What's it called?
Play?
We don't know. Hamilton.
Oh, Hamilton. Oh, Alexander Hamilton. Oh, okay. Well, yes, that's a play. But you know, that one sort of is. But you know, I think what they've tried to do with that, I haven't seen it, so I know that's anathema, is that they really try to make it like it's about today. This is one of the things that happens with costume dramas, is that we take the stuff that we're interested in today and we kind of project it backwards onto other people at a different time. You know, like, for example, they look at, some of these books about women, written by women and so forth, and then they try to make that, the woman lived maybe 200 years ago, 150 years ago. They try to make everything in it to be sort of like what it is today. Like it's all about sort of the feminism of the 21st century and so on. Which I don't think it always, that was really their thing at that time. But that's what we do. And so that's part of what we have to look out for when we're watching a costume drama, is that there can be anachronisms. Anachronism. What's an anachronism? It's a big word. Come on in. How would you define anachronism? Something out of place in time. Okay. Yeah, take for example one of my favorite Western movie stars, John Wayne. You ever heard of the John Wayne, the Duke? Imagine the Duke on his horse, and they give him one of those upshots. I don't know what they call it, right? They're down and they're looking up at him, so you see a bunch of sky behind him. You see the horse and you see him, And then you see in the sky a little jet trail, white jet trail of a jet in there. That's an anachronism. There were no jets in the 19th century. Or somebody's supposed to be in around that time, let's say 1900 or something, and you hear a cell phone ring. Something like that. That's another kind of anachronism. Some of the anachronisms are much more subtle than that, though. Sometimes it's pretty easy to tell. Like, they're panning across, and it's supposed to be a wide open plain, and then you see like a car going up a road or something. So people love to find those little anachronisms. But sometimes the anachronisms are far more subtle, and they have to do with things that really a lot of people may not catch. for example, my wife really likes, the costume, the fashion and all that. She knows about a lot of that stuff, right? I don't know anything about that stuff. So if they're wearing the wrong kind of a dress, right? Nobody wore that kind of dress in 1880 or something. And she'd say, wait a minute, what are they doing? That dress, nobody wore that dress until 1920 or something. Or something like, or the hair, the way the hairstyle is, stuff like that. So those things you have to kind of know. And we have those videos you're supposed to be watching, like from Downton Abbey, right? Has anybody here ever watched the Downton Abbey? I call it the Downton Abbey. Nobody? None of you watch it? Okay. It used to be big. I've watched it. But, it's all about a family, a very wealthy family. And they live in a big house in England, right? A manor. And it's just about them living there. But it's about the sort of nobility, and it's about then all the people that work in the house who are not nobility. And by the way, they're British. So it's a costume drama. By the way, another fun fact about the Downton Abbey house, if you ever see any of the Downton Abbey stuff, the house which it's in, and they always start every show, they would show the big manor, right? Like an aerial view, and then they would show them walking up to it and all that kind of stuff. That is the house where the man who, Lord Carnarvon, who is the guy who backed the excavation of King Tut's tomb. He was a guy who was very interested in King Tut and Egypt. And so anyway, they don't call the guy that lives in the house Lord Carnarvon. I forgot what they call him. But anyway, but that's his house. And what's happened now is, of course, these houses are very expensive to keep up. A lot of money. And so by having this thing filmed there, of course, they get paid a lot of money to be able to use it for that. And that's, helps them keep it up. And also now, if you go to England, you can take tours of these houses. And I'm sure you could take a Downton Abbey tour or some other Pride and Prejudice tour or whatever. And they will take you to the places where it is. Okay, so it's set in a historical period. But part of what we need to do is examine, and sometimes, it'd be harder for us to know. And, there was a guy I knew who was very into weapons. We won't talk about it. But he knew about all of the, for example, he'd watch a Western and he'd see a guy pull out a rifle or, get a 6-shooter, right? And he would immediately, get really angry. Why? Because this film was set in 1668. That gun was not manufactured till 1868, and that gun was not manufactured until 1898, 30 years later. What are they doing? I can sense you have his outrage. So that's the kind of stuff, though, that people who are into it. Remember, I told you about the book that I read, that novel I was reading. Remember that? I told you about that, a novel I was reading about Saladin. And in the novel, so I was kind of getting into the story. Then at one point, they gather around a campfire and they start smoking tobacco in a pipe. And I'm like, I'm out. The book was up. I had to get it renewed to finish it. And I thought, I don't know. I don't think I'm going to finish it. Why? That turned me off. I just got stuck on that. Why? There was no tobacco in Egypt at the time of Saladin. It would not be there for another, I don't know, 400 years or something, 300 years. So, that bothered me. My question is, does any of that kind of stuff bother you? Something you would see in a movie that's just not right. What kind of thing would it be that you would notice? Maybe you wouldn't notice the gun was from 1898 and they're in 1868 and the gun wasn't manufactured until 30 years later. Maybe that wouldn't bother you because you're like, well, I don't know what the gun, looks like an old gun. Well, what would bother you? got anything that would bother you in particular? Yeah.
I was watching, I forget, it was like some indie movie or something that was supposed to be set in the 80s.
Right.
The music was wrong, so it was like they were listening to something that didn't come out until like 92.
Okay.
And it was like 1987.
Right. Wrong year, wrong movies, or like in the background they've got a TV show or something on, that TV show wasn't on at that time. Or I don't know, they're reading some magazine, the magazine didn't exist until later, or whatever. So those kinds of things I'm talking about, and some of that, if you're into the music, that's going to get to you. Now, other people might say, well, it's an old song, close enough. 10 years off. With the gun, 30 years off. I don't care about the gun. But is there anything else? Yeah, so the music, that's a good point. And there's a TV show I watch sometimes. It's called The Goldbergs. You guys ever heard of that TV show? Goldbergs? It's set in the 80s. But what they do is they just say, they don't tell you what year. They just say it's, January, whatever, 1980 something. And then they'll have different events happening. Now, sometimes those things, they're roughly in the 80s that it's happening, but sometimes they got things sort of mixed up a little bit. But it's a little nostalgic, so you can go back and see people or clips or songs and things from 1980s or 1990s. They got another one called School, that's in 1990s. So, yeah, so you have to be careful. And you also have to be careful about the kind of clothes, especially in those kind of shows. They are showing you sort of fads, things that were, like this kind of shoes everybody wanted, or this sort of shirt, or, this kind of skateboard or something. And if you're really into that stuff, you would know, wait a minute, that's not right. When do they have the little wheelie shoes? You know what I'm talking about? The shoes at the wheels. What is that?
Heelys.
Heelys? When were those out?
2005, 2006.
Okay. Early, yeah. So if somebody had those in the 1990s, you would say, wait a minute. This is supposed to be 1995. Nobody had those kind of shoes then, right? Or if it was set later, like now. See? I would just be around to getting them. Of course, I never had those because I just knew. Are they coming back? Oh, there you go. I don't want them because it'll just cause me to break something. That just seems really dangerous to me. Not for me. I don't want them. But yeah, I've seen them. But the kids they go sliding across the hallway or the sidewalk or something.
I saw one recently that it was a basketball jersey out of place. So it was like a long year on a basketball jersey.
Basketball jersey.
So
yeah.
Because they've changed so much.
Yeah, the style of yeah, that's right.
So it's like they had a late 2000s, I think it was a Clippers jersey, and it was 1990 something.
Okay.
That jersey didn't exist yet.
Yes. So you see, it could be clothing. It could be music. It could be equipment, like the kind of phone somebody has, or the kind of car that they're driving. They're driving a car that didn't come out till then, or a car that didn't exist in that, whatever. Now, these are all things that people notice. So if you're making a costume drama, and if you're watching a costume drama, I think we can learn a lot about the period, even if it's an artificial story, but it's set in whatever, 1980, 1880. If the people have done their work, right, and if they're careful, you can actually learn something. Don't you think you could learn something about that period, even if the story is fictitious? Can you think of any sort of fictitious story set in a historic period that you actually learned some history from? Queen Elizabeth? It's on Netflix?
The Crown.
Yeah, I forgot what it's called. But I would watch that with my mom.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there is one called The Crown.
I think that's what it is.
I think that's Queen Victoria, isn't
Oh,
it?
I mean, Queen Victoria. Okay. I'm sorry.
Okay.
But I don't know. I don't think that's.
Yeah, I haven't seen much of that. My wife was watching that. I did.
It's good. Yeah.
Is it good? I just didn't know she was like kind of a hussy. I just thought Queen Victoria would be very, Victorian, but she was not.
I didn't know about the history, so I don't know if it's accurate. But I mean.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is the thing. You get, if you watch that show, which I've seen like maybe one episode or two, if you watch that, then you get a sort of idea, at least, of what they are telling you Queen Victoria was like. Was she really like that? I don't know. I do know, for example, that after her husband died, that she wore black for like the rest of her life. She was in mourning for, I don't know, 20 years or I don't know, a long time. And so, they did kind of show her meeting her husband and how she was really, taken with him, and a little bit about, I didn't watch enough of it, but I do know that she was pretty serious about mourning him after he died, and she did it for 20 some years or something like that. She only wore black. I don't think she ever stopped after he died. Okay. Well, let's see what we got on the next one. A lot of these films are appeal to the ladies. Some people have a name for that. My wife calls them chick flicks. I don't know if you're supposed to call it that or not, but that's what she calls it. But yeah, they do. I think, I'm thinking why? Well, I think because, there is a lot of fashion, a lot of clothes, a lot of pageantry, dancing, sort of ceremonies, and, romance, that kind of stuff. People, I guess all people like it, but I think women tend to like that more than men. Am I stereotyping? Probably. But I think it's true. So for example, this I would say would appeal more to many ladies, and then I think this would appeal more to maybe men. No, maybe, I'm sure some ladies like this too. A lot of ladies used to like Mel Gibson. I don't know if they do anymore, but they used to. So yeah, this I would call this a costume drama, although it's very different than this, right? So costume dramas can be more than just British guys going around and talking about, I don't know, the Lord of the Manor. It could be a Scottish guy trying to kill British guys, like this movie.
There's a movie on Netflix that takes place right after Braveheart.
Okay.
It's called Outlaw King. It's with
Outlaw. Okay. Outlaw King. Okay. It's supposed to be Robert the Bruce, maybe? Is that what it's about?
They make him look like a great guy, and it's really funny. My friend had never seen Braveheart, and so he was like, "Robert the Bruce is the coolest guy ever," and I was like, "You should watch Braveheart.
Yeah, watch Braveheart.
You're gonna learn something about it."
Yeah. Well, there you go. I mean, here are guys dressed up, right? They got costumes, swords, screaming. They got the blue paint and stuff. Which I think is a little, that was something that they did in the Roman times. I'm not so sure William Wallace was doing that, but again, I haven't analyzed that. But it is something the Picts would do against the Romans. They would paint their faces blue and white and stuff to sort of scare them, or I don't know why.
Most audience don't know the history of films, so
Yeah.
an average viewer isn't going to know, so.
Well, yeah, so that's the question. Does it matter, I guess? Does it matter if it's correct? Does history matter at all? Does the truth really matter? Well, you're right. A lot of people aren't going to know. Like this guy that I knew who looked at this gun and said, well, there's John Wayne using this gun. And that gun, this movie is set 3 years after the Civil War, so that'd make it about 1868. And this gun was not invented till, I don't know what it was, 1898. It wrecked the entire movie for him. I said, well, John Wayne still got the gun. He's still shooting people. Let's watch that part. Now, there are a lot of themes. We've already talked about some of those themes. Is this what you were talking? Is this the one you were talking about? This is the young Vic. No, this is a movie here, I think. This isn't the Netflix thing. But you see, there's so many of these, they're hard to keep them apart, right? And they're about royalty. You know, you've got, this one's about young Victoria. Then you got one that's Queen Victoria. They got a lot about Elizabeth. I think, you know, Elizabeth I has four or five movies have been made about her, you know, which all were pretty popular films. So in other words, royalty, Queen Elizabeth, Queen Victoria, like you're saying, we had William Wallace and then Robert the Bruce now, right? And so people like to study, you know, they don't really want a costume drama about regular people most of the time, because regular people aren't that interesting. Plus, they don't have that great of clothes. It's like an old, tattered, beat-up clothes, right? How many movies you want to watch of that? But how about this? You know, you got uniforms, you got crowns, you got, you know, candlelight and dancing and fancy food. That's stuff that's neat. Now, here's the other thing that happens with these films. When they start making these films, they've spent so much money making the sets and making the costumes and all that kind of stuff that they, you know, they don't want to stop making the film. In other words, they want to use all. So usually these films can be very, very long films. Because it's sort of like, you know what, we spent all this money on this. We don't want to just have like a 10-minute scene of them dancing around here. Because we spent like, you know, $5 million making this scene happen. So let's get a little more money is worth out of this. Let's give them a half an hour in this party instead of 10 minutes. And so then the movie goes from being, say, 2 hours, hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours, 3.5 hours, you know, because we've already got the sets, we've already got the costumes. And, you know, guys who make films always shoot a lot more than what they use. So they decide to leave more in. So that's another thing that kind of happens too. You get sort of longer films, a lot about royalty or special people that are not ordinary people, usually, right? You don't have too many ordinary costume dramas, ordinary times, ordinary people. If it is somebody who's not wealthy and famous, they become famous through the movie. You know, like they become a sports star, or they become a civil rights person, or they do something extraordinary. You don't want to, you know, nobody wants to make a movie about me getting up and driving in to school. It's just, even I wouldn't want to watch it, and nobody else wants to watch it. I mean, it's not that interesting, right? You want something interesting. But you know what I ordered? It's on back order. It's a giant plastic bubble, like they use on sports fields to play or whatever that game is. You know, where they roll it around. Guy gets inside of it and runs. Like you walk and the ball rolls. It's kind of like you're a hamster in a ball, except it's a person. That's what I want to get until this coronavirus is done. I'm going to go around in that plastic ball. Could be hard to get on the elevator, maybe.
Maybe if you would cancel school. I'm trying to graduate.
So you want us to cancel the school?
I don't.
You don't want us to cancel it. I don't think they will cancel school. But if they do modify it, I think what they'll do is tell you to turn stuff in online or tell you to do alternate assignments. No, they're not going to.
Some colleges have already shut down.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to cancel completely. Some of them, I know what some are doing. They've shut down because they got spring break in another week or something like that. So if they shut down now, and then by the time spring break is over, they've got their 2-week window, and they're hoping that things are maybe better by then, or maybe they'll be worse. Who knows? I just want to know, when are the zombies coming out from this? When the people get this virus, then they turn into the zombies. Are they going to be the fast zombies or the slow ones? I'm hoping the slow ones. So I at least got a shot.
Not as entertaining. The fast ones are much better.
Well, yeah, but I'm just thinking about survival, man.
No one
That's why we
survives.
have guns.
I mean, I could survive for a little while. if they were slower. But they're very persistent. I just want to know if they're so hungry, why don't they just eat each other? Why do they got to come after me?
They're not cannibals.
They're not cannibals. The zombies got principles. No. I'm not going to eat another fellow zombie, but I'll go for this other dude. Anyway, yeah, they're not as tasty. The zombies don't taste as good as the regular, you know.
They're picky.
Yeah, picky eaters. They're kind of picky eaters. Well, you know what? Then you find out that everybody's already infected. That's what you find out. I don't want to spoil any of the zombie shows, but typically they find out everybody's infected, and so when you die, you're just automatically going to become a zombie. You don't have to catch anything. You've already got it. What's that?
Season 2 of The Walking Dead.
Shh, don't tell anybody. They haven't watched it. So yeah. So what that means is just got to find your inner walker. Texas Ranger. That's another show. Well, here's the thing I was talking about, just for fun. We got to watch out for the anachronism, right? Like we've already been talking about. Clothes, customs, foods. You know, the guy's eating the wrong kind of food. What was it I saw? What was that I saw? Somebody went into like a McDonald's. It was supposed to be like in the 1970s. And they ordered something that, you know, they didn't have in the 1970s. I forgot what it was. But anyway, you know, like a breakfast burrito. Nobody had a breakfast burrito at McDonald's in 1972. Anyway, I worked at McDonald's for a short amount of time. So that was in the 70s, believe it or not. Yeah, 1976 I worked at McDonald's. So I kind of know what their menu was in 1976. There were no burritos on the menu. Not yet. I'm not saying there shouldn't have been. I like breakfast burritos, but they didn't have them. Had a lot of Egg McMuffins is what we had for breakfast. Pancakes, sausage patties, scrambled eggs, a McScramble with bacon. I don't know if it was McBacon or not. Probably should have been. Well, here's what I was talking about. Here's our buddy, John Wayne. He plays Ethan Edwards in this movie. And this is a movie that's a pretty famous movie. It's because it's kind of a little dark. It's a little different than some of the movies that John Wayne made. But he plays a guy who comes back from the Civil War, and he's kind of a little distorted because of the war, I think. And he comes back to his family, and then he finds in his niece, I guess it is, gets kidnapped, and he goes looking for her. And anyway, I don't want to give you the whole story. But here is one scene where he's using this rifle, a Winchester model 1892. That's because it was made in 1892. The film is set in 1868. Now, I'm sure I just wrecked the whole movie for you. You can't ever watch it. Because now when you look at that, you're going to go, well, that's wrong. But there are some people who do know about these things, and they do care about them. Has anybody seen the new movie, what's it called? Little Females, Little Women? There's a new movie called Little Women. It was out, I don't know, last fall. Nobody saw it? No? You heard about it? Well, you know, they've made several Little Women movies. Little Women movies. It sounds weird to say Little Women movies, but the movies about the book Little Women. I think this is probably the third or fourth one anyway. But they said they were going to do this one with a new twist. I just wanted to know what that new twist was. My guess is, and I might be wrong, let's hope I am, is that they're going to make these, the women in Little Women, the new movie, sort of like they live in, 2015 or something. In other words, they're going to have wearing the clothes of, the 19th century, but they're going to be having the issues of modern women. To make it more appealing or whatever, speak to today, that kind of stuff. We often do that with a lot of things. It's not just movies. I know people who write entire papers, essays, monographs on history, and what they're writing actually says more about what they're thinking about things today than about the things of that time. Have you seen the TV show MASH? You ever seen that show? MASH? Never saw it? Really? None of you have ever seen MASH? Okay, wow. Okay, that was on for many years. It was very popular too. In fact, the final episode of MASH at the time had the largest television audience in history. Now, of course, I imagine it's been topped since then. But of course, that's back in the day when you only had 3 or 4 channels, right? So you didn't have so many choices. Now you want to sit down. You could spend more time figuring out what you want to watch than actually watch. Let's say if you've got an hour to watch something and you're not sure what you want to watch, you could spend 15, 20 minutes just trying to figure out what you want to watch or more. Especially if there's more than one person there. Well, what do you want to watch? I don't know. What do you want to watch? Well, let's see what they got. Well, what kind of stuff you want to watch? Because now you can just pull up a huge menu of thousands of movies, television shows, whatever, and they're all just right there. This is certainly not the way it used to be. It used to be you had to, for example, if you wanted to see a film, you had to go see the film in the theater while it was running, or you're never going to see it. There was no way to see it except going to a theater. So, then they invented video cassette recorders, right? VCRs, and you could get VHS tapes of movies. That was like amazing. Now all of a sudden you can watch a movie as many times as you want, but you got to buy the movie or you rent it or something like that. And then they went to DVDs. Now they go to streaming. Now everything's on demand or whatever. So it's really changed what people watch, the way people watch, and what's available. It used to be there would be like at 8 o'clock on a Thursday night, you would have a choice between 3 things. What were you going to watch? You're going to watch Gilligan's Island. You're going to watch MASH. See, now there I just made an anachronistic error because Gilligan's Island was not on at the same time as MASH, except in reruns. In my world, there are reruns. So anyway, but there would be 3 choices, and you would have to decide. And for example, there might be a great show, but it's up against another great show because they try to put the best shows up against each other. So sometimes there are some great shows that just didn't make it at all, because they were competing head-to-head with this other show in the same time slot, and that was it. You had to choose. Are you going to watch Channel 5? Or are you going to watch Channel 7? Or are you going to watch Channel 2? That's pretty much it when I was a kid. We had a few other channels there because I lived near Chicago, but we had Channel 9. That was independent channel, WGN. We had Channel 11. That was public television. And if you had the UHF, which I know you want, you could watch Channel 26. That was all in Spanish. They had a lot of Spanish soap operas, or I don't know, some kind of, they were all in Spanish. And so I used to watch them sometimes. I don't know why, but I would, because I didn't know mostly. Well, you can kind of tell what's going on, because they're like, like they're really, that lady is upset. I don't know why she's that upset, but she's mad at this lady over here. So I'd watch it for a little bit. We had Channel 32, which was another independent channel. All right. And then we had later on, Channel 64. So I actually had a lot more television channels than most people did at the time, just because I lived near Chicago. And I could also get some channels from South Bend, Indiana. So talk about choices. Now, of course, those 3 channels were often the same as the 3 Chicago channels because they were networks, and the networks all had the same thing going at once. So, anachronism is what you got to watch out for. But take MASH, for example. What got me off on this was MASH. And you haven't seen MASH, so this example doesn't make much sense. So that's why I don't know what to do. So, but MASH is about, I don't know if you know the show, I guess you don't. It's about the Korean War, right? MASH is a medical, what's it stand for? Medical Army something hospital. Basically, it's a temporary hospital on a battlefield, in a battle area, and they would have helicopters that would go out and pick up the wounded soldiers, and it would bring the helicopters back to this MASH unit, which was tents. They were, big tents, and they would operate on people, and they had tents where the people would recover, had tents where the doctors lived, had tents where they were operating. So the whole thing was a pretty temporary, a mobile, that's what the M stands for, Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, I think something like that. I think that's what MASH stands for. But anyway, the show was on for, I don't know, a decade or more, right? By the way, it was about the Korean War. The Korean War lasted about 2.5 years. The television show lasted like 4 or 5 times longer than the war did. But the whole thing was set in Korea, but really the way it was written, and there was a movie first. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie. There was a movie called MASH. Donald Sutherland and Elliot Gould. It's a movie that came out in the 70s, or late 60s, early 70s. And then the TV show was kind of a spin-off of that, right? And so you have these doctors who are, they're dealing with death every day, but then they're like dealing with it with humor and, playing pranks on each other. And, but sometimes they would get serious too. So anyway, you'd have to see the show. But the reason I brought it up is that actually it's pretty apparent that the movie MASH and the television show MASH really wasn't about the Korean War. It was about the Vietnam War. And the Vietnam War was still going on when a lot of that was happening, and it was still very fresh with people in their minds. And so a lot of the sort of anti-war stance of it was really an anti-war in Vietnam, and a lot of stuff they sort of said and did had more to do with Vietnam than it did with Korea. So that's what I'm saying. We often take something that's modern to us, current with us, and we project it backwards to others, right? You got to be careful about that, not only in films, but in history in general, that we take our modern, this is a controversy. I don't know what you think about it, but to me, for me to take our sort of modern perspective on things and then say that somebody from 400 years ago is not sort of following the kind of things I think they should be following. That they're, they're racist or they're sexist or whatever. They say, well, yeah, we can point out that's what they are, but can we expect, what can we expect? Okay, these people, because that changes all the time, right? What is acceptable and what's not acceptable. If we want to learn about the history of that day, yes, we can analyze it that way. But to say that that person must have the same set of customs and beliefs that we have, I think is asking too much of somebody from 300 years ago or more. It's a different world. So what we should try to do is learn their world. I think in doing so, we will learn something about our own world. But I don't think we learn as much when we just say, I'm taking what we got from today and I'm just going to project it on there. This is just my vehicle for me to talk about what it is I want to talk about. And I know a lot of people that do that. And they see everything that way. I want to talk about this, so I'm going to make them make this fit backwards to them. Well, I guess we're about out of time. So on Wednesday, be looking at your topics, what you're supposed to be working on, and we're going to talk about those then. All right? So stay healthy and safe. We'll see you next